So what's left to cover in chapter 14 is margins, and these are pretty important. So we'll use the same page we've been using in the previous video, should look familiar. And you might remember I cheated a little bit. I already added a margin on the bottom because I didn't like the way it looked when the white box was touching the bottom of the page and it wouldn't scroll up any farther. So I added this margin bottom. Okay, of 50 pixels. So what if I also wanted to have some margin on the left side? Because when we look at the page, it maybe looks a little bit stupid to have the white box smashed against the left side of the window, the browser. So how would I get, I could type margin left and also make that 50 pixels or something like that. But instead, I'm actually going to use the shorthand, which we've seen before with padding and border. And that is, you don't have to specify margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left, and use 4 lines. If your margins are going to all be the same size for one thing, then you can just use the shorthand and only put one measurement, and it will affect all 4 sides. So if I save this now and reload, what do I see? I still have my 50 pixels of buffer space at the bottom, margin, right? But now I also have 50 pixels of nice open space on my left side. What about the right side? Well, I actually have a margin there, even though we can't see it. But if there were something on the right side of the white box, that margin would push that second thing farther to the right. So that might be something that you wanted to change if there were something sitting there on the right. Now, what about the top? We don't really have, we might have the 50 pixels, but we lost a little bit of the margin that comes by default to the paragraph element. And the reason for that is margin collapse, which only affects top and bottom margins, not left and right. And this is discussed in chapter 14. What if I want the white box, the div, to be centered horizontally in the page? So what if I want equal space on the left and the right? I could try to estimate how many pixels do I need to push it into the center, but that's going to give me a big problem, which I will demonstrate. Let's see. So let's keep my top and bottom at 50, but let's say I want... well, here, let's just do an override. What if I say I want my left margin to be 500 pixels, say? Is that going to help me center it? This is actually wrong, but I'm going to show you to prove it, okay? So, all right, so I have a big giant margin on my left side. It's not centering, but I could keep trying to adjust it. Or maybe it's 400 pixels, maybe it's 350. But this is not centering at all, because look what happens when my window is narrower, right? This is not centered. So what is the best way to center this one single div, this one single box? There is a really easy way to do it, which you will be delighted to find. And we aren't going to say left because we need to use both left and right. So we're going to use the shorthand version where the first value means top and bottom and the second value means left and right. So we already have a top and bottom, and for left and right we're going to use auto. Save, reload, and now our white box is truly centered, because when I change the width of my browser window, this div recenters itself no matter how wide or how narrow this browser window is. So auto, margin auto, is your friend and everybody else's friend when it comes to centering a block level element on a page. So margin auto. So just to repeat, the reason it's got 2 is because the top and the bottom margin are still 50 pixel, and auto is affecting the left and the right margins. Since we've got on to centering, I want to talk about how we center other things, not necessarily divs, but we've got other things on this page. We've got an H1, we've got an image, and we've got a paragraph. So do we use margin auto for all of those? Well, there are some other considerations. The H1 is a block level element. It means it goes 100% of the width of the page by default. Now, we could put a width on the heading too, but we don't necessarily know how wide the heading's going to be. Do we really want to make it more narrow than 100%? So we can center the heading without changing the width by using text align. So I will have to specify, I will use the selector H1 because that is what my heading is. Here, let me show you, right? So heading, there's my heading, right? My H1, it's the only one on the page. So I will go in here and I will write here. Text align will center text, right? Only use this for text. Do not try to use it for anything that isn't text. Of course, a heading is a text element. So I will save, I will reload, and bingo, we have a perfectly centered heading no matter what happens. All right, great. What about this paragraph? Don't worry, I'll get to the image in a moment. But this paragraph, what if I want that to be centered as well above the white box? Well, let's see. I could try to just add the P so that I've got two selectors with one rule. That should work, but there's going to be a problem. I'm going to save, I'm going to reload. That does exactly what I wanted it to do with this single paragraph. But look below. I have also centered the text in every paragraph on the entire page because I just said P, make them all centered, right? This is considered really bad by most designers, this kind of centering of text. Amateurs like to do it. They think it looks cool. It's actually much harder for people to read when you center body text in this way. So we don't want this to happen. So what is our solution? How can we center the one paragraph without changing the HTML? How can we center only the one we want? Well, remember that this one is not contained by anything. It's just out in the wild. But these paragraphs are all contained inside the div that we've been working with. Can that help us? Yes. And this is a little bit obscure. Robbins covered it. But what you can do with that paragraph is you can say, I want only a paragraph that is a direct descendant of the body to be text align center. And that is what this little greater than sign is doing for us. It is specifying do not touch any paragraphs that are inside another element. But if a paragraph is not inside any element and it came directly from the body, then we can center that one and only that one, or only those. So I will save and you'll see the change. Keep your eye on the white box when I reload because the image source paragraph isn't going to change, but I'm going to reload now. Ta-da! We have a left align paragraph, which is the best kind of paragraph to have in web text. But a one-line paragraph, perfectly okay to center that. So only that one was centered because of our tricky little knowledge of descendants, right? So body greater than means direct descendants of the body, and only P's that are direct descendants, plus we already had the H1 because we can put two selectors into one style rule to have some shorthand. Now we still have not centered the image, as you can see, and you might make a mistake and think it would be okay to do this. I've got this copied so I can paste it. All right, so since we saw margin auto work before, you might say, well, look, the image can have, it can be centered by margin auto, right? Just like a div. This is wrong, but I'm going to prove it to you. So I'll save and I will reload and nothing happens, okay? So Why not? This is where you have to remember that the image is an inline element, not a block element. So only block elements can be centered with margin auto. Images, it can be counterintuitive, but they're inline. So one way to do this, there are various ways we could solve this, but one way is to change the display property of the image, force it to act as a block, and then margin auto will work. So I save, I go over, I reload, and voila, I have a centered image. So now each thing on my page has been perfectly centered, and each thing on my page, oh, I can't quite get the heading and everything else in there. If I make my browser more narrow, everything will remain centered because of this combination of using text align center correctly and using margin auto correctly. So one last thing about margins, and this requires us to take away all the centering that I've done. So I'm going to delete, and let's see, even this. I'm going to take off every margin that I added. All right, so I will save, I will reload to show you we're back to the beginning where everything is smashed against the left side of the screen of the browser window. So I wanted to show you that it's also possible to put a margin on the body. And what if we wanted, say, a top margin of 20 pixels and sides of, or maybe the other way. Well, maybe just put everything 50 pixels, okay? So this is going to be within the body tag. There's going to be a margin on the left, the right, the top, and the bottom of 50 pixels. So all four sides within the body, which contains everything that's on the page. And that's the only margin we've got. There's no margin on the container. There's no other anything specified. So save and reload, and what is this going to do? When I reload, you saw the margin affect the top and the left side, right? And it also affected the bottom. So sometimes for some designs, what you're going to want to do is just put a margin on the body, but be careful to not have lots of other margins on all your other elements. This is another common beginner mistake. Too many margins conflict with each other, and then they become unpredictable. And on different sizes of devices, it'll give you a big headache. So this concludes our overview of margins. And when you use margin correctly, it can be your friend. When you use too many margins or you don't use margins in an intelligent way, it'll just make your life miserable. So learn to love margins, learn to use them correctly.